All right, so this week's prompt was which perspective or approach made most sense to you that we talked about, and think about your own beliefs about leadership and how leaders can motivate followers to achieve their goals. For me, I think the leadership perspective in the first chapter of this module that made most sense to me was the situational approach, because every job is different and it's important to kind of change your style of leadership depending on the job. I mean, with like a police officer or something, leading like a team, they need to be more authoritative and more direct to the point. Whereas like a job like my job, where I'm on the phones and I'm working on a team to help customers, um, having like good relationships with the managers is going to be more effective to lead like my type of team. So I think the situational approach was really the one that stood out to me most. Also having like the portion of it where it said it was effective to tell followers like expectations and rewards or punishments just before, like, I think just setting goals for your team, whether it's like the week or the month, is really important. So that way everyone's on the same page and then exactly what to expect going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a good one. I honestly feel like all of them had like really good aspects that I feel like are important and that make good leaders. But the one that I really liked was transformational, because I feel like that is really true. Like, you are nothing without your followers. And I feel like some of the best leaders, like Steve Jobs and like Martin Luther King Jr. and stuff, like really were transformational leaders. And it said like the qualities are like creative, interactive, visionary, empowering, and passionate. And I feel like those are really, really good characteristics that some of the best leaders, in my opinion, have. But I do feel like all of them really had like situational and the skills one, even the charisma one, like I feel like they all, like, you can find leaders that kind of like fit each of those. So yeah, there wasn't like one.
Yeah, I agree. Like what it was saying, how like there's the transactional leader who just like is like very just like the basic needs.
Exactly. Like, yeah.
Having like that's important, of course, but how the transformational leader just takes it like a step above the rest. And I think a transformational leader is going to be able to easily display all of these different types of approaches to leadership, depending on what's most important for the.
Exactly. I almost feel like a transactional leader is almost like what we were talking about, the difference between like managers and leaders. Like transactionals are probably like a lot of managers, like they just kind of get you to the base level, like, and they do enough. But like, yeah, transformational leaders really like lift up the followers. And I feel like those are the best type of leaders.
Yeah, I think the when I was kind of reading through the chapters, it feels like each one is like getting a little bigger, like a little bit more I guess relationship oriented, or like a bigger and more effective type of leader. And so, but the one that kind of stood out to me, like when reading that last chapter about transformational versus charismatic, I think what stood out to me is that both of those, but especially the charismatic leader, is kind of like on a stage almost. Like they're either a public figure, or even if within the group, they are kind of they kind of take up a bigger space, if that makes sense. Like it feels like they're a little bit more on the stage, whereas I think transformational might be able to work under the levels. Like I think kind of in our, I don't know if you read a lot of the discussions on the discussion post, but there was one of them that said that there's like a primary leader, or like a position leader, but underneath, oftentimes, that there's a functional leader, someone who's actually being the leader, even without the title. And I think that those ones, I think transformational leaders, those people might be transformational leaders because they're more about the group. They're more about meeting people's needs rather than taking up that title, if that makes sense. And so I think kind of thinking about that, and it kind of made me actually when I was reading back through the chapter 3 again, the first chapter of this module, it made me think of that, like the one that I really like the most, I think, because it is like the building blocks of leadership, is the LMX, the leadership member exchange theory, because I think all leadership is kind of built on relationships and how those relationships take place. And I think in a variety of different contexts and in different situations, those relationships are going to look different. And so being able to judge the quality of each individual relationship within a group, that kind of is the building blocks of leadership. So I think the one that I like the most is actually the LMX one, I think.
Mm.
So I've got a totally different perspective just because of what I do. I agree. I think situational leadership was my favorite approach, but I deal in an environment where there's not always like the best trained people, or maybe they're disgruntled. So it's that readiness and that willingness. Like you have to be able to, get a good feel of what this learner or this person, this employee or team member is, able to do and what they're willing to do. So for me, functionally, that's like the best style. But in my experience, the leaders that have been the most influential are the ones that I've like completely admired the most are transformational leaders. And that's because they become transparent with themselves. So they put their pretty much their personal and their work lives in complete, they're completely vulnerable. And I think that's how they kind of get followers to completely follow them, because doesn't become a business transaction. It becomes a human connection. And for me, like, I think as a leader, that's the best approach. But like in my current role and like what works best and what I do is more of a situational. But yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you guys are saying. Those are those two things that it's like the yin and the yang. If you're in a job where it's more task oriented, I think situationally you have to really like, figure out, are they well trained? Can they do their job? And are they willing? But as a company, and are you trying to get people to move like past a goal or, do things that are beyond their job responsibilities? That's a transformational leader.
Yeah. What do you guys think was like the least because I feel like traits like that one, I was like, I don't feel like that. Like, I mean, there's definitely some people who are born with like traits that make them a good leader, but I feel like as far as that theory, and I just think that's funny that was like the leading theory for like so long. Like people believe that if you would just like, you look like a leader, therefore you're going to be a good leader. It's like, that one was just funny.
Like the Abraham Lincoln, like,
era. Yeah, like tall. Yeah, exactly. Like,
yeah, I agree. I mean, having, certain traits that you're born with can make you a leader, but I really think that the best leaders, like they're like humble, and then they learn, and they basically just learn how to be a leader. So, and that's also another thing that goes on with like transformational leadership. I was saying how like good leaders turn their followers, like they push their followers to become leaders, and then the leaders become like, moral guides. So I think that's kind of something that I agree with, because I think it's not something that like most of the leaders that I've had in my life, they're not like born leaders, but they have like the knowledge, the expertise, the confidence, the passion, like everything that the book was saying, like a transformational leader. When I think of a good leader, it's not someone who is like tall, dark, and handsome, or whatever it was saying.
Yeah, I think I also agree. I think that any ineffective leadership theory or style or approach would be the one that I guess kind of gives up on the people or their followers soonest. And so I think the trait theory would be that, like, oh, you're not strong, then you can't be a leader, or something like that. But what I think I think there is some merit to the trait leadership in the sense that not everyone can become everything. And so the way that I kind of envision it, I guess, is that a good leader helps its followers become the best versions of themselves, you know, and trying to, and that's also like what the transformational leader is about. Like it's getting into the third, fourth, and fifth levels of needs, of like the higher order needs, you know. And so I think like the ineffective ones would be the ones that say, oh, you can't do this, then I guess you're you're just not going to be a good leader, or you're not going to be a very effective follower. And as a supervisor, I'm a supervisor at Starbucks, and so one of the things that I have to do is kind of look at the people on my floor and kind of see what their potential is and how good they're going to be. And I got to be honest, some people they're not fit to be supervisors or really high capacity leaders at Starbucks. Whether that's because of their just their personality or whatever. But I can use my leadership tools to be able to get them to to be the best version of themselves, the best barista or the best possible barista that they could be, you know. And so that's kind of the way that I think of it. I used to think, and I kind of still do, think in terms of like, okay, level 1 barista is like a new trainer, and a level 5 barista is someone who's ready to be promoted to a shift supervisor. And so maybe some people, and then there's like level 2, 3, and 4. So maybe some people I might be thinking like, okay, they have the potential to be a level 4 or a level 5. And so as a leader, I would try to get them there. Whereas some people, maybe just because they're not as invested in the store or as invested in a Starbucks career, or they're more focused on school, then my leadership would be, okay, maybe I should get them to level 3 or something like that. And so I think that's the kind of leadership that I think that kind of recognizes the merit of the trait leadership, that not everyone can be everything, but still not giving up on them, and trying to develop them into probably as good of a leader as they can be. And that's why I like the transformational leader more than the charismatic leaders, because I think, especially reading that last bit in the last chapter, I think the transformational leader is really focused on trying to build another leader, whereas the charismatic leader is a kind of a little bit more self-centered, about trying to be all that, the superhero leader, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. The charisma one kind of reminded me of like politicians, like just putting on their best front, like trying to get everybody, but it's like, you're so fake. Like, you know, just to get the followers. Like, it's not because you're just like putting on this persona, I feel like. But yeah.
Right.
So Emmanuel, do you think, like from your personal experience, because I know you said like you agree with the traits leadership, do you think that anyone like coming in like and entering like an whatever starting barista or whatever, that would be anyone that has the drive and the passion to, you know, if they want to become a supervisor, do you think that at that point like traits don't matter as much if they do have the passion to do it and like they're willing to put in the work?
It's tricky. I wouldn't say that I know how. I guess I should say this. I should say there are some people. I think everyone has the potential, and I wouldn't say that I agree with the trait leadership model. I just think that it has some merit. I wouldn't say that everyone, or that there are some people who have no chance of being a supervisor type leader. I guess the way that I look at it is more kind of in a shorter term, because chances are the baristas that I'm working with are not going to stay with Starbucks for more than a few years at the most. And so like if I get a new barista who's like 16 years old or 17 or 18 years old, and has no leadership skills whatsoever, they're probably not going to be a supervisor at my Starbucks. They might not be a supervisor at any Starbucks. They might not even stay with Starbucks for more than a year. But the way that I look at it, so in that sense, I'm like, okay, there's no chance of them being that level 5 leader at this store, but perhaps I can help develop them and develop leadership skills, or get them to the next level, so that maybe 10 years from now, they might be able to take on that role. if that makes sense. So, and I think that in order to become a good leader, you have to be in the right position, if that makes sense. And you have to have that passion, and you have to have that those solid relationships. And if this Starbucks is not the place for them to be able to flourish those opportunities, how can I get them to the position and to give them the tools and abilities so that when they are in a position like that, they can flourish? And so I guess it's not really the traits. The merit of the traits leadership is, I guess, more in a situational kind of aspect where not everyone can be everything in every situation. But I think that given the right conditioning and the right experiences and passion, they can eventually become effective in most anything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool how you can like recognize, you know, those certain traits in people and try to like develop those. Because I mean, even if someone, you know, starting out at Starbucks, they don't stay there for long, at least you're helping them grow their skills for their next job.
Right, exactly. And what I've noticed is that a lot of times the really good people, or the really good baristas, or the people who have the highest potential at the Starbucks that I work at, are the people who have built experiences from lots of different work that they've done in the past. Like they've done, if it's their first job, it's because they're good because they've had lots of volunteer work somewhere else. And so I recognize that somewhere else they developed those skills, and now they come to Starbucks, and now Starbucks might be the place for it to flourish. And I think that was the case with me. Whereas some people, Starbucks might be that first step, and then they'll flourish somewhere else. And I want to be a part of that as well, and be able to develop that, and so that maybe some other company will be able to be like, wow, this person is awesome, whoever their supervisor at Starbucks was, you know. So I guess, I hope that makes sense.
I would love to chime in, because I'm that person that you're talking about. So I was super young. I worked in the grocery business starting as bagger when I was 15. And by the time I was 20, I was a store director for Albertsons. And so I was that person that like, oh, they're just starting out, right? And it's like you have to like overcome like, oh, you're young. So coming into Starbucks, I've been with Starbucks for 14 years, and I see those young people totally different. Like they're moldable. Oh my gosh, you can influence them more than you can influence somebody that's been in the business for 15 years and thinks they know everything. And in what you're saying, later in life, like, so I had baristas. So I ran a store for 2 years, and those baristas and those shift supervisors and the assistant store manager, I'm still in contact with them. And it's funny to watch them flourish, like, you know, through Instagram or Facebook, or, you know, like a lot of them, I've just watched them, and they're in these high manager positions now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I remember you when you were a barista, but I gave you a chance because I didn't write them off because they were young. And I think that is like a borderline, you know, age place where a lot of people leave companies because they're just trying to figure out what they want to do. But I'm telling you, those are the most impressionable people that you can actually touch. You know, like you can really leave like a footprint on them. And to watch them now, because now, you know, they're I don't know, I guess you could say they're 10 years younger than me, or maybe whatever. But they're in these positions where they'll ask me for advice because I was that person that like kind of guided them or gave them a vision, or just kind of pushed them to their max, right? Because you bring the best out of people when you think they can do the job, or you give them the ability.
Yeah.
So yeah, don't ever write off. I speak backwards, right? It's like, don't write off the older people. I'm like, oh, don't write off the young people. They're amazing. That's me. Like, I see my daughter at 19. I'm like, she's a go-getter. Like, she's going to conquer the world. But I hope somebody gives her a chance. You know, don't wait until she's 30 years old. And, you know, just because you look mature doesn't mean you're mature. But that's just my soapbox. Sorry.
No, that's cool. That's good. That's a good story. I like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have plenty of time on this one, so that's good. Anything else you guys wanted to add before we end it?
I think we're good.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll stop the broadcast.